here to share the story of their life, not only together but their families' lives here in Whatcom County, and where they ended up and how they ended up here. I met them here a few years ago when I joined a quilting group at the Lutheran Church at Nugent's Corner, and they both are part of that group that we get together every Thursday for 3 hours and put charity quilts together. So at this time, I'm just gonna. Which of you are gonna go first?
Ladies always first.
Okay.
Oh. I sort of assumed that this was a sort of looking back on the Hillard Solvik family. And I was a girl that grew up on the other side of the mountain by Lake Squalicum, and my last name was Smith. But this guy I met at high school, and his name was Solvik. And Solvik means Sun Bay in Norwegian. So I even have an embroidery with that on. I think our son had it made, however. So people get the name right. It's not really the family name. Neil, you tell them what your real family name is.
Well, my grandmother in Norway is Maria Andresen, and that was the family name. But when the boys got here to America, they found there was a whole page of Andersons in the telephone directory. And so they thought that was a good time to make the change. So they chose the name of that little spot in Norway. It's about 10 acres of ground and a little bit of a railroad track and a bit of a fjord. That's where the name Solvik came from. So that's the early beginning. So my dad came over here by boat, a steamer, not a passenger line or anything like that. But they landed in Canada, came across Canada on the railroad to Vancouver, and then down by bus to the Laurel area, where one of my relatives lived. Actually, it was a cousin, and Dad got a place to stay and got directions and started to learn English. And that was a kind of an interesting process too, because one of the first jobs he got was on a fishing boat, and not on a fishing boat actually, but on what they call a big trap that they used to have in the early days, where the fish would.
Christine?
Well, no, the fish would hit like a net going out into the water, and then they'd get coaxed into an enclosure, and that would be closed, and you dip the fish out with a big like a dipper. But he would spend Sunday afternoon reading the funny papers, and you can guess the words and the meanings and all that kind of stuff from reading the funny papers. So that's where my father became literate in English.
Your dad and his brother Norman, though, came over, I think, several years after their dad had left the family.
Yeah.
And there was quite a family left in Norway, too. And I was happy that Neil and I could go back to Norway and visit, the farm and the family. In fact, we went twice when we had the chance and we were younger. So this is Solvik, and it's way above the Arctic Circle. And his mother came from even further. Her family came from Narvik, and that's above the Arctic Circle. But we also visited up there when we were visiting Norway. But that comes later in our story as to when we got to go up there. But I remember that Neil's family is just so full of history. But on his mother's side, it is so hard to keep track of, because her parents met back in the Midwest, and two brothers married two sisters, but then there were deaths, and so you end up nowadays with his children, her children, their children on both sides. And then the brothers split. One brother settled in Canada with his family, and then Neil's grandparents settled right down on the, let's see, what road do we call that? The Hillard
Hillard Road,
Which,
which is the name of my maternal grandparents,
yeah.
Ole and Inga Hillard. They settled here in America about between 1870 and 1880. That was the time when NookChat Valley began to welcome foreigners, and a good percentage of them happened to be Norwegian. In fact, there was such an influence of Norwegian in our area that the tribal leader of the NookChats learned Norwegian.
Oh, wow.
So that was.
Remember his name?
No, I don't.
Out right now, we used to.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway, you had church in Norwegian, and I
Yeah.
think you had school in Norwegian too, didn't you? At first?
Yeah, there's a little Lutheran church on Nugent's Corner, just almost at Nugent's Corner. In the old days, that was a evangelical Norwegian free church, and we worshipped in Norwegian. So my first pastor was a purebred Norwegian. So that's a long story.
And then, when you were in about grade school? Or
Yeah.
the-
Last part of grade school, we moved down to the other Lutheran church, just about a quarter of a mile from Nugent's Corner, the Emmanuel Lutheran Church. So that's where where I really grew up, in a sense.
You didn't tell him how come though, and who got you to move?
Well, my grandmother Inga would
Yeah,
look at this situation where two churches are quite close to each other, both same denomination. Why do we do that? So why don't we get together? We'll be a stronger group. And so some of the family decided that was a good idea. My grandmother, an auntie.
I think it was your grandma, and Grandpa had passed away maybe by then,
You had.
and your mother and dad, with the two boys they had, moved to Emmanuel. But Myrtle's two brothers had wives that said, mm-mm, and their family stayed in the free church at the corner. And so that was sort of sad. But anyway, we still had many family things together even after I joined the family. And when did I join the family, by the way?
About 1945,
Well, you were
46.
in high school,
Yeah,
weren't you?
45, somewhere.
I had
45.
my eye on him for a whole year before he noticed me, you know.
And God works in mysterious ways, you know. I was in a group we called the Future Farmers of America, FFA, in those days, and one of my responsibilities as president was to make sure that things went well for an annual affair that the ladies in the school would cook dinner for us.
I think it was a banquet.
Yeah. And afterwards, we were supposed to get everybody home safe and all that stuff. And somehow, I was elected to take home my dear
He
Clarice.
was elected. The first time I'd heard he was elected.
Well, you know. So I took her home, and that was the beginning of a lifelong romance, I guess.
And I was afraid it was going to be a tragedy because my parents had left their home on the Y Road by Lake Squalicum and moved to a farm down beyond Agate Bay, Dr. Brinson's farm. And it was wartime. My dad began to build a home there, but at the time we were living in two little small houses put together with what we kids called a pig chute. You know, they hooked them together with a little hall, and it was up on the hill. But as he was driving me down to this faraway place from Mount Baker High School, it had been raining, and we hit a water hole, and the car went And I thought, oh, this is the last time he's going to take me home. But anyway, the car came to life, and I guess our relationship did too. And so we had some more dates after that.
So that was in 1945, and we didn't get married until 1950.
50.
1950.
November.
So that was kind of a long romance, but it was good. In the meantime, I was off to college. I attended Pacific Lutheran College in those days for 2 years, and I was going to be a opera singer. That was my goal.
That's right.
And Maria Lanza was the one that was important and famous those days. But unfortunately, my throat didn't agree with my plans. I had all kinds of trouble with my sore throat, couldn't sing and all that kind of stuff. So, well, after the second year, I thought, well, maybe I should change. So I moved over to Washington State College and enrolled in the School of Pharmacy. And that was a very good move, I think. It opened up all kinds of doors for my life.
Now, can I interject here?
Oh, yeah.
I have to show you, though. This is the first song my mother heard him sing. And he was on the program at Rome Grange, and he sang,
Oh, maresy dotes and dozy dotes and little lambsy divey, a kiddly divey do, wouldn't you? A kiddly divey do, wouldn't you? So if the words sound queer and funny to your ear,
a
then
little bit jumbled and jivey.
sing, mares eat oats, does eat oats, little lambs eat ivy. So there you go. My introduction to my future mother-in-law.
Yes. Now, I think you should go back to your family a little bit. And this is a picture of Neil being taken down by his little brother, Jane Marvin. Did you get that one? Okay. That probably didn't happen too often. Neil was about 5 years older than Gene, and as you can see, it really tickled his brother that he got him down. He would always do that. I want to show you a picture of the little yellow house at the corner of the Hillard and the Old Deming Highway. But what was that like when you were a boy?
That's stumps.
The whole farm.
There were a few big trees. I remember one of my jobs as a little kid was to start a fire in a big old cedar tree and get it to burn so they could do farming around it. The other job I had was to tamp dynamite in the stumps that were hard to burn and blow them up and all that kind of stuff. So the little bit of...
What is that?
That's,
Is that the outhouse?
oh,
Like an outhouse.
there
Like a
was,
oven maybe.
no, he has an open
Oh, it's fireplace.
fireplace out.
fire pit.
Grandpa
like a
built
barbecue
that.
pit.
Oh,
Yeah. It's
Only
a
it wasn't a
little
pit.
deteriorated these days, but it's still out there.
Yeah.
But no, this is the pump house where the well is, and I think your uncle dug it, didn't he? And
Yes.
then, it was quite a few years before you had an inside toilet, I heard.
Yeah.
And the toilet was just around, not too far from the well,
Well, that's
the way it
The way it
was.
the way it is.
Yeah.
Now they got so many rules and regulations you can't believe it.
Did you want to?
But my maternal grandparents homesteaded, I don't know, 140 some acres, farmland, and then some property up in the hill too. So when my parents got married, they gave the gift of 5.9 acres of land, which you saw in the picture. And so that's where my dad and the carpenter built their house. And that happens to be the house that Mom and I have lived in now for 28 years.
This is-
And I lived in
Mom
there
and Dad's
more years before that. So that's a little bit of history of that little corner, or the little yellow house in the corner.
Is that your folks?
Yes.
Yeah,
My
that's
mom and
Dad's wedding.
Gents and Myrtle Solvik. So there, a little bit more of history there. So what else do we need to?
I might add that
Somebody got a question? Not burning, okay.
Myrtle went through school, right here at Lawrence. And we have pictures of her in school, her classes and things. But she also graduated from Mount Baker High School. And I have her great big certificate here in my memoirs. And isn't it strange? It was before the building was built up at Deming. And so when we had a big reunion, I'll never forget, I had Myrtle at the reunion, and they were honoring the oldest graduate of Mount Baker, and it was Norma Thomas Bruget that would not recognize Myrtle because she said, well, the building wasn't built yet. And I said, yes, but I have a certificate that says she was graduate of Mount Baker High School. So I was a little at odds with Mrs. I don't know if she was Bruget then or the other name. But anyway, Myrtle was a graduate from that school, and she was on the basketball team.
That's when they wore the long clothes to play basketball.
Sort of like bloomers.
Black.
And so I enjoy looking at the old pictures of the basketball team in those days. Now, Myrtle had Art and Ivan as brothers, and she had Esther and Alma as sisters, and it was a great time when families would get together and have picnics and be together. I think Gents now, because his parents were split, but his Auntie Ellingson, his mother's sister, lived out on the Guide Meridian. And some of you may have heard of the Ellingson family. And so they became very close to us as well. And they had quite a number of children. But in those days, they just had a ladder that went up to the stairs. By the way, their house is for sale right now, but the property is down to 5 acres. It also was a little yellow house out on the Guide Meridian. Looks much like this one. And I think they had maybe 5 kids, but here came Gents too, so he also went up the attic to sleep. They all slept up in the attic in those days. And it was a chicken farm for many years, and the Ellingson son, the eldest, was single, so he just continued to live there and kept care of family. His sister Norma was way up in the Navy.
She retired as a lieutenant colonel from the Navy. She'd been a nurse, happened to be at Pearl Harbor when that happened, so she saw some interesting things.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember about that little property on the corner there was that Norma, my cousin, used to sit on a stump in the front yard and count the cars that went by.
On Sunday.
On Sundays, and oftentimes they'd only see a couple.
Can you imagine?
The other thing that was interesting on that farm was that our kids loved to go out there when Kevin and Stephen were young. And they were playing hide and go seek, and one of the kids got in the milk tank. All this beautifully clean tank for milk was hiding. And the farmer in that family was a guy named Erling, and he was such a wonderful fella, very patient and kind and understanding, and they didn't get in trouble at all.
Well,
Yeah.
he wasn't too
So that was
happy
early
about it.
days.
He never let us forget it, for sure. So, well, Neil and I were married down at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in 1950 at Thanksgiving time. And he was still over at Pullman going to school. But the war was on, the Korean War, and we were thinking he's going to have to be going off to war. So why not get married and we could at least have Christmas and Easter vacation before you graduate? And so we decided to get married at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church down here at Lawrence. And let's see, I was teaching school in Cedar Woolley my first year, and Gordon Carter was my superintendent. And I remember, I think my salary was $3,000.
For the year.
Yeah. And so we had a wonderful wedding, and my sisters were,
I'll hold it up while
With
you're
me?
while you're reading.
well, gotta hold it still. Anyway, we were married, and Neil's cousin Bud attended, and his brother, and so we finished out the year, and he came back and forth from Pullman, and when he graduated, he got deferred. Lo and behold, he had to find a job to support his wife.
And guess where I found it? The little town of Everson. I worked in Everson Drug Company for a guy named Andy Edler. He was my mentor for 2 years, so he was a good man, huh?
And tell him, where did we live?
Where did he live?
Where'd you live?
You know
Over
where?
at Walker's grocery store.
Do most of you know where the drugstore was at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Black Forest Restaurant
Yeah.
is there. And Andy Edler not only had a drugstore, you went in the door and there were the newspapers, the magazines, the liquor store. To the right was,
Soda fountain.
yeah, it was the soda jerk.
Me.
Beautiful, your stools and marble. And then there were 2 clerks, women, and Marion was one of them, and all the counters were covered with glass. I was pretty impressed, but I was not impressed by the reason. Andy smoked, and he kept smoking at work and would lay his cigarettes down on the counter. And
I had a
then,
glass counter.
guess who else started smoking?
Oh, well.
Yes, and I did not like it, so I really complained. I finally got him to quit. And
But
then,
she still enjoys having a root beer float. I learned how to do that well, didn't I?
yes. Anyway, Andy Edler had deer and all sorts of trophies on his wall in the pharmacy, and I have a few pictures of that. But we lived across the street from the drugstore. And at that time, there was a building that's no longer there that had Walker's grocery store down below, Dr. Green's office up the steps, and if you went down the aisle that had High Notes, I think was
The alley.
there.
The alley.
In the alley, there was a door that went up, and we had a nice apartment up behind Dr. Green's office. And his nurse lived there, and her name was
Miss Funk.
Miss
F-U-N-S,
Funk.
Whatever. Yeah.
And I want you to know, Miss Funk knew just about everything, you know. And so I'll never forget. Let's see, when did we have Kevin?
1954.
4. I can't remember. Had we been to the world? Yes.
No, we hadn't been there yet.
Yes. I came home pregnant.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right.
I get ahead of my story here, but anyway, Neil did get drafted.
Yeah, all things have to come to an end sometimes, even though they're good. We had wonderful years in Everson.
I think we were on our 2nd year of my teaching at Sumas when he got drafted. And,
Yeah.
you know, and he went off to camp training down in California.
Camp Roberts, California, basic
Yeah.
training.
Letter came and told me he was going overseas, but tell him what happened.
Well, that's a long story, but I was a little bit older than most of the fellows in my basic training, so I made a few friends at the base hospital and got transferred up to the pharmacy at the base hospital to help the boys out there do things that they didn't like to do and all that stuff. So And then when the orders came for going to Korea, my orders read to go to Germany. So that
Yep.
was a wonderful time.
You volunteered to go to Germany. Remember?
You just
There
kind
were-
of do things a little bit different. You get better results.
Because the officers had told Neil while he was setting pins for him in the bowling alley that there was an opening at a hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, 1,000-bed hospital. Well, when that news reached me, I told Dr. Green and Miss Funk, and he said, "Land's sake, girl, you can go there." And I know I still blink my eyes to this day because I hadn't even thought or realized that, you know. He said, "What an opportunity, you can go there." And that's exactly what I did when school let out. I got a ticket, and I still remember I wore my red wool wedding coat with a black velvet collar, and I pinned some lefse in this pocket and probably some more lefse in case you don't know what lefse is. That's a Norwegian coffee hour bread, sort of. We made some yesterday, and I threatened to bring some to show you, but he wouldn't let me. Dry flat sheets until you fix them. So anyway, I went off to Germany. What kind of a flight did I have?
Propeller plane.
Yeah, and it was long,
Yeah,
about 14 hours or something.
not a long time,
I
I
don't
forget.
know. Anyway,
But that was a wonderful step that the Lord took in my life, because that was the best training I could ever find for doing hospital pharmacy. Before that, I knew nothing about, hospital pharmacy. I knew the retail business end of it, but here I got exposed to the really a proper way
Yeah,
to run
making
a
it.
big hospital pharmacy. And so that's my job at Landstuhl General Hospital, was taking care of that pharmacy business. I and another guy did, and so that was a good training for what I had to face the rest of my life. So coming home after the service, we ended up in Bellingham, Washington. Lived on the south side on 36th Street, and I worked at the Herald Pharmacy for I think it was 8 years, 8 plus. Starting a family, doing all that stuff, and
yeah,
but Mom especially had a desire in her heart to learn more about what's in the Bible. She had kind of a sketchy training in Bible, and she wanted to go off to Bible school. So guess what?
well, before that, our first son was born in 1954, and Kevin was a very healthy guy. He grew up to be joined the Army and became a helicopter pilot and a mechanic. And so he served in Germany and Korea, but not during war. He was never in a battle or war. Weren't we fortunate? And so Kevin was 2 when I got pregnant again, and we were on 36th Street. Neil was at the Herald Pharmacy, and we were very active at Central Lutheran Church, teaching Sunday school and everything, but I got pregnant with this guy,
I'll hold it for you. You don't
No.
hold it still enough.
Stephen Clare. 6 months I started bleeding. I had a complication. The placenta was growing out over the edge of whatever called for difficult birth, where I hemorrhaged a great deal. And placenta previa, the placenta comes first. Well, that night I went to the hospital, but they had a brain surgery on. And I was at St. Luke's at that time. Why they didn't move me so I could be taken care of, I don't know. But they let me bleed all night. And Neil and my mother prayed. And 7 o'clock the next morning, they took that baby by cesarean section and shoved him in their lock, and he lived. I did too, but I was kept under hypos for 5 days, and I had no idea that things were so serious. So Stephen is now a father, not a grandfather yet, but he's a doctor down in Kentucky. And God blessed us with 2 sons, and I was able to go home. But because of his traumatic birth, I wanted to know the Word of God even more. So,
Off to Bible school for 2 years. Maybe the best years of our life. What a wonderful experience and a blessing to be able to spend time studying the Word of God.
but he got called to be Dean of Men too. That sort of sealed it when the letter came saying, Neil, we need a Dean of Men. Would you consider coming and being the Dean of Men? So
That didn't involve any salary, so I had a part-time job at Bartell's Pharmacy in Seattle, and I went to the boss for an interview, and I said, I can't work on Sundays, and I give the hours that I could work, and that's just exactly what I got. So I could work when I could, and didn't have to work Sundays. So that was a good time. But again, things come to an end, and we had a mission emphasis conference get together where we invited other missionaries in to speak to the student body, and one of the retired missionary, a pastor, can't think of his name right now, Ward,
yeah.
spoke to us afterwards and said, "Did you know that they need a pharmacist in Liberia?" And of course, I didn't know that. And I didn't even know where Liberia was. I was thinking it was Libya. You heard about Libya during World War II.
This is Liberia.
But anyhow, that was the beginning of our experience of going to Liberia for 9 years. Anything happen exciting?
Well, lots happened in Liberia.
We got a daughter.
What?
We got a daughter.
Yes.
Karen was born
In fact, here in America, I was sort of told, lay off having any more kids. Well, Neil always wanted a daughter, you know. So we got a bonus of a daughter. We went out to Liberia. There. One of the, I taught school too, by the way, and also cut a lot of people's hair, kids' hair. Gents, you know, cut everybody's hair in the neighborhood. So, you know, I learned. I went to beauty school or to get my hair fixed or cut. So I took lessons while they were teaching the person doing me. So I was brave. I did a lot of hair. In fact, I didn't ever quit until I came home here. So we went out there, and I told the doctor that Neil really wanted me to get pregnant. So he checked me over and he said something that I'll never forget. He said, I don't know why you shouldn't. Your birth canal's as good as an elephant's. And so my birth canal, you know, I got along just beautifully. Neil was out fighting a bushfire around the compound where we lived by the hospital.
Yeah, California doesn't have all the fires,
No.
that's for sure.
And he was really worn out, and was sleeping when my water broke. Oh, well, we lived right by the hospital, and so I just got out of bed and went traipsing over to the hospital. It was probably from here to, I don't know,
Front desk.
no further. But anyway, I met the night watchman, and he didn't say anything. And I made it in the hospital, and I imagine I got checked out, but they gave me a bed. But I was interested in who was having a baby. I heard a lot of commotion, and they could hardly keep this lady on the table. She was a jungle woman, I imagine, that had come and had trouble. Well, they weren't happy with me out watching deliveries, you know, and it didn't scare me at all. And so I went into labor, and I had a normal labor, and we got a baby girl. and her name is Karen Marie Solvik. And she put Marie out now and goes Karen Solvik Myers, because she's married, but wants to keep the name of Solvik. And she happens to live in Indiana with her husband Pat, who is a teacher of classics. Right now he's teaching Latin to high school kids because it's compulsory. And it's hard to find a teacher these days to teach Latin to high school kids. So that's where they are, and they have 3 children, and Julia, and Stephen, and then Louis. Julia's out of high school now, and Stephen's doing high school at home on the computer, and Louis is about a 6th grader, I think. But anyway, wonderful family, and we were blessed to get a daughter named Karen.
One of the nurses in that delivery area was about a 250-pound African lady. And when Karen was born, she leaped up into the air and shook the whole hospital and said, "It's a girl!" That was awful good news. So I'll remember that forever, too. But so here I was as a hospital pharmacist in Liberia. One of my first jobs was to open up a warehouse because it was a brand new hospital and a lot of the equipment was still in big containers that came from America. And it was rain time, starting to leak, so myself and another African strongman got the stuff opened up and stored in a safe place in the warehouse. And that continued to be one of my jobs, to run the supply, hospital, warehouse, and all the stuff that is contained in that. One of my nice jobs was to run a pillow speaker. We had a pillow speaker in every bed, so every pillow you could hear something going on. And I had like a little cage that had a fancy tape recorders and stuff like that, and different languages, messages from Elwa radio station. That's Eternal Love Winning Africa. So that was one of my kind of fun things. Another fun thing that we did every week was to go to a nearby leprosy colony, and I would try to teach these young people how to read their own language. I wasn't expert in it yet, but I can do phonetic stuff, and like I can say yaba, which is an onion, and show a picture of an onion, that kind of stuff.
We gave out medicine in their tongues.
Oh yeah.
Say that.
Oh, that's part of hospital pharmacy, isn't it? I think. Anyhow. Yeah, tunagiliwa nini, tunagiliwi. That means you take one in the morning and one at night.
And you made your own packaging, didn't you?
Yeah, we didn't have medicine bottles in those days, but we did have paper, and we made a little triangular piece of paper like an envelope, and put a line like an arc on the paper, because everybody knows what the sun is. It gets up in the morning and it goes down at night, and put a mark there, tunagiliwa nini, tunagiliwi, one in the morning, one at night. We visited the wards a lot. I remember praying especially for one of the patients. Actually, the patient had died, and the father was there visiting. And he had such a faith that he put me to shame, because I was really concerned about him, and he ended up praying for me, because I was just devastated by the death of that young girl who, I knew a little bit about and so on. But, experiences like that are really what makes life kind of wonderful and exciting. Another wonderful opportunity I had was to run every morning we had a chapel service right next to the hospital, part of the hospital actually. So we had a worship time in the morning in 2 languages. One morning it was very extra exciting because we had a snake come into the area and walk and go crawl. Actually, I don't know how it could stick to the wall, but in my memory, that snake crawled on the wall. Maybe there's a ledge there, and I can't remember. Look out! And anyhow, that was exciting to have a snake come to chapel in the morning.
It's not the only snake story we have.
Go ahead.
No, I have to jump to Nepal. My snake story is in Nepal.
Okay. How did we get to
I wanna jump
Nepal,
there.
huh?
Well, I don't know. We had to come home from Liberia first, and we went back
And the
to
mission
Seattle.
supported us for a year after our service of 9 years. So where would we go?
Well, honey,
We went to Bible school.
but we were told in the beginning, you are going out there to train and teach. Your job was to find someone to
Oh, yeah.
educate, and then we would come home and leave. Well, it took him 9 years to find someone and get them ready.
Not because I'm slow,
No, no.
because it was very hard to find someone trained in Africa who knew about math.
They only learned math by rote, no reason, didn't understand it.
They have a card, 2 + 2 = 4. Oh, that's the way it is, but
had
what's
good
behind
memories.
that? What does that mean?
And so it was very hard. He finally had a kid show up that was from a neighboring country that had better education than the Nepali schools. Not Nepali, Liberian schools.
Yeah.
And so he was able to train this guy, and you even got Professor White at
Washington State
Washington
College.
State College to give him a scholarship to come to Washington State for a year of schooling here. And he was on his way back when Neil got shipped out of the country because
You don't have to bring that up.
we had a bad incident happen. Yes. And I can't remember everything.
Well, one of the jobs of the pharmacy was to prepare IV solutions. And we had a very nice automatic autoclave that you could put in a whole bunch of stuff and get it sterilized. And that one morning I came in, one of the nurses was a lady named Mary. Anyhow, someone had allowed everything to boil over and get wrecked. So I said, who messed up? Whatever it was. And Mary Quasey was the responsibility. And I'd been reading a magazine about the ability to train animals to do various jobs. You know, you get a banana if you push this button the right way and all that stuff. So
Including
I
monkeys.
said I could train a monkey to do this job. That is a very bad thing to say in Liberia or
Yeah.
any part of Africa, but I lost it, and I'm sorry, Lord. But that was the end of my experience in Liberia.
Mhm.
I was given 7 days to go home.
Yeah, we were getting ready to go anyway, but you know, that's what happened. She said, who you call monkey? That was the beginning of it. So,
We often had a hand of bananas on our back porch, you know, bananas that long, lots of bananas. So I grabbed a hand of bananas and took over to Mary Quasey's house
the next morning,
to say I'm sorry. I made a mistake.
I think that's when,
You bringing me monkey food.
oh dear. So anyway, we came home.
Went to Bible school and got a call to go to Nepal.
We were home a year though, and that's when it saved my life being called after we had gone back to Bible school, and Neil got to graduate along with Kevin. And we had physicals, you know. They are very good about checking you out as well as in to do mission work. And I had passed all the exams and given a clear bill of health. But when we were asked to go to Nepal later that year, I said, no, I'm not leaving this country until I find out why my stools are getting this size, Neil. There has to be something wrong. That's not normal. No, not for me. So I went to the doctor and I had a sore throat or something. He didn't listen to me about my stools. So then I got nosebleed or something. I went back again. Felt like telling my elderly doctor, hey, listen to me. And I brought it up again. We were asked to go out of country, and I said, I'm concerned about my bowels. Oh, tell me about it. Well, I did again. And so then he just wrote me up. I was to have barium enema next day, and I had surgery within 3 days. My bowel was extra long. And Cheryl's mother, same thing, my older sister, we found out. And the scope can go so far, and they get to the end of the rope, you might say. My tumor in my large intestine was beyond where that tube could go. And so my tumor had grown to block 90% or 75% of my large intestine, and it had already bulged there, ready to break. If it had, I wouldn't be here today. But they did a surgery, and I got a big hunk taken out, but that's not the whole story. The surgeon, I had to tell him that the people at the Bible school had laid hands on me and prayed for me. And they said one pastor thought that he saw clearly the tumor was gone. I hated to tell my surgeon this, but I did. He said, I tell you what, we'll go in anyway. I have seen miracles. I believe in them. But since you still are having small stool, we are going to do the surgery. So I had it. Everything went fine. I tell you, it was just a wonderful blessing. And you know that surgeon sent $1,000 to our hospital in Tanzania every year on the date of my surgery. And they didn't tell me until we left to come home, and that was 18 years later. That man, that surgeon, invested a lot. I read a letter to him, from him, to me. I like to keep things, you know, and he let me know how he felt about us. And we were special to him for sharing about our faith and our life. And he also was a believer. So that man, surgeon, was down in Ballard, and I still remember him. Of course, he's retired and may be gone now. So I'm here today. That was 44 years ago I had surgery, and now I'm 88. I was 44. That was the year my son, this one, he still would talk to me in Liberian English. Oh, my ma, she 4-4. Oh, my ma, she 4-4. That's how he would go around talking.
So Mom graduated to life.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to graduate from Lutheran Bible Institute along with our son, and that was a wonderful experience to be able to do that. But that was the beginning of our life in Nepal. Again, I don't remember how we really got connected with Nepal. Do you?
They needed someone.
Yeah, but how'd we find out?
I know. It was
It's God business. You can't explain it entirely. You know, it just sort of happens. You know, and it's wonderful.
It was a big guy that came out to visit us. You know, he was running that part of the world for our mission board.
Yeah.
Don't you remember him?
Yeah, I can't think of his name though.
So
So
how
that
long
was
were
the-
you there?
16 years.
16 years
Wow.
in Nepal. That was the beginning. So one of the words in Nepal is uto suto. That means upside down or backwards. Well, we're sort of beginning a new life. We're
Yeah.
uto suto into the country we call Nepal. And again, it was quite a difference from animistic culture in the jungle of Liberia to the very strict laws and regulations of life in Hindu
Yeah.
culture in India or
And
North
this-
India.
This is a sample of Indian or windows and woodworking in Kathmandu. We all hear people say Kathmandu. No, it's Kathmandu. Did you get that? Okay. This is a window frame that's been made into a picture frame, of course. But these sorts of things are carved out there. And our daughter grew up in Tanzania, out on the hillside. This hospital happened because there was a man who was very interested in birds. He wanted to get into a closed country of Nepal.
He was an ornithologist from Cornell University in the eastern United States.
Dr. Fleming, but his wife happened to be a doctor. And so he took her along. And my gracious, she saw the great need for medical care in that land, a Hindu nation. They worship more gods than our people, I think. And
They have more temples than houses.
it's very poor. No, I brought a candle. We were forbidden to share our Christian faith. Otherwise, they could kick us out of the country. And Neil and I got a very nice lived in one end of a duplex house close to the hospital. It was built up on the hillside. In fact, this doctor and her husband, they worked their way into the country. And they did start some medical work. They first were given a place on a garbage heap in Kathmandu. And then they got out to Tanzania, and again, they were given a place where they felt bad spirits lived. And that's where they got to build the first building. But they worked down in the main part of Tanzania too. But eventually the hospital was built out of town where the spirits were.
It's called Busildara.
No one wanted to go there, huh? So they let them build. The first surgery that the doctor did in Tanzania was on a door. Laid the door down. Did some surgery that needed to be done. I don't know. These people were really brave. But anyway, we were lucky enough to come during the age where we had a house to live in. We had a generator sometimes that had the fuel to give us electricity. We had one faucet that ran water into our house. We had to boil it. We had a lot of privileges. But the one privilege we have by living very close to the hospital, Neil would come home for coffee about 10 o'clock. Because he started at 7 or so in the morning. He would light the candle on our table.
But I usually had someone come along with me.
Yeah. They would, a Nepali, you light a candle, they would look at our bare bulb hanging there above the table. What, Solvik, would you light candle for? Guess what? You asked. He had the perfect privilege of telling them what this candle stood for.
We've
Well-
heard about Jesus, and he is the light of the world.
I am a Christian, he would tell them.
Yeah.
And he would light it and let it burn. And you know, right by our dining room table, we had bookcases, and we had some Bibles that I don't know who published them, but they were Nepali, right next to it English. You think that young men, women didn't want to have a Bible that had Nepali and English? They especially wanted to learn to read English. They would often ask for
They
more.
have very few books in Nepal too.
So that was one of our secrets for being able to witness and to share the gospel.
The one thing I'd like to kind of, you guys to come around to is what you've been doing since you got back here. I know that there's a lot of different things that you've been involved in.
Yeah.
Well, one of the fun things is to visit the Bellingham Care Center in Bellingham on Birchwood, just to sing for the old folks. And Mom plays the keyboard, and I sing, and I read the Bible and tell them what I read and pray, and they just fall in love with us and fall in love with the Lord once in a while. So that's kind of a nice thing to think about doing. We also do a lot of visiting. People who are sick and down and out and whatever. What else have we been doing? We do quilting with Chris, and
Make baby lets and all these things that Lutheran World Relief send around to disaster areas in the world. And so it's been a real blessing to be involved in that. And one of the ladies that does all the hem stitching with her serger machine is here, and it's good to pass it on, because when you get to be 90, I don't know how many years I am going to have left. But you know, that machine that I'm using today, I bought in Liberia. It's a Bernina. And they had, a free market in Liberia?
it's called the free market.
Well, whatever.
Somehow you don't have to pay taxes of some sort.
Not a flea market, but
No, a free, F-R-E-E.
Anyway, it's been a blessing.
It's not free.
Wonderful machine, and it's gone a long way. That machine went with me then to Nepal as well. I've done a lot of sewing and mending, and so it's still in use. Yeah.
And in the time that you've been doing things, I've kind of heard you mention going to pick up bread that goes to the
Food banks.
food banks,
Mhm.
and
2 times a week we did that for a number of years.
And Neil was in the coffee, chocolate, tea distribution, trying to help.
Fair trade, selling
Fair
fair
trade.
trade stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's so many
So
things.
gradually,
that
I'm
we
trying
can
to get other people involved in this. So now Doug, my buddy Doug, has taken over the bread business, and that's kind of fun to see other people to kind of get excited about doing what you've been doing for a long time. So
and I know that there's Wednesday nights at
Yes.
that church. There's a dinner that's put on.
yeah, lots of dishes to wash.
We received.
Yeah, that'd be a good thing to end with, Mom.
We received a lovely plaque.
Hold it very still. So I think our time is.
Am I shaking too much?
Good.
Okay.
25 years of service among the people of Liberia and Nepal.
And in our kitchen, we have Grandma always with us. This is still Grandma's kitchen, I tell you. It's pretty nice to come home to a home that your husband's parents built and lived in all so many years, Myrtle and Gents, and to a loving couple. I tell you, Grandpa would always come in and he would say to Grandma, "Elsker du me, Mommy?" And she would say, "Yea, Elsker day.
Yes,
Yes.
I love you.
I love you." And I am very fortunate, not that I didn't have loving parents, but they didn't show it in front of us kids much. Whereas his parents were always loving one another, and you could see it, you know. It's not unusual for them. And then I brought this to show you, because often before we eat in this household,
I don't know, I didn't see his eyebrow come up, Mom.
oh. Okay. Well, you might not be able to read that. Some of you are Norwegian, but Neil's family would often pray.
Jesanam går vi til vår spisedrikke padet år. Gutelada astel gaven så får vi mat på Jesu navn. Amen.
But I brought a few other things too that I love to use. This set of dishes is in the cupboard. They were Myrtle's. I don't know when she got them. Her sister had the apple pattern, and this is the blossom pattern, and I'm privileged to have it. This hangs on the wall. As Grandpa got older, or not so old, for some reason, he liked to do needlework. And he did this. He did needlepoint of the praying hands. We have a big one on the wall. He wouldn't let me bring it, but because it was framed, I guess, maybe. And if we're going over time, then oofda. You know what that means? Uh-oh.
That's a wonderful word in Norwegian. You can use it for all kinds of things. If you hit your thumb with a hammer, you say ofta. Or if you said spill something on the floor, it'd be ofta. So
And before we close, I would like to know if there's anybody that's got anything to say from the peanut gallery.
We always remember, those of us who went to Mount Baker, Neil's father was the custodian. Yes. And so he kept that school in great shape. And we probably didn't throw any paper when he was around either, because we would have.
Yeah, Dad was a very fixture at Mount Baker High School, and I've heard that he counseled a lot of young men in the boiler room.
Yes.
Probably straightened up quite a few kids.
In fact, this is a picture of gents being given an award. And you know, when he retired from there, they hired 3 people to take his place and do the work. But they also, the community and the teachers, gave Jensen Myrtle tickets to fly to Norway. Yes, and they had a wonderful trip to Norway. And I can't remember, was his mother alive yet? I
don't remember.
can't remember either. But
Any more questions? Comments?
there's
I
his
just have,
certificate.
You know, I've read a lot about Kathmandu,
Uh-huh.
and did you ever have a chance to go and do any trekking up in the mountains, or, because I know it's a place where people start.
It's a wonderful place to go trekking. I went on a trek from our area at Tanzan. The big mountain is called Annapurna. It's a big one too. So at Annapurna, there's one area where you're almost completely surrounded by these big mountains, but there's a river going into the area where you can follow along the river, go over a couple avalanche trails, which is very scary. But you get into that amphitheater with snow-capped mountains around you. It's just a beautiful place. Dr. Warwick Britton and I went in, and on the way in, we slept overnight at a place called Hinkle Cave. And it's just a natural cave, but it happens to face where the moon comes up. So we were snuggled into our sleeping bags, and we thought something was going wrong because the light was coming in over this mountain peak, and here comes the moon.
Oh.
It was a wonderful experience. And we did cross an avalanche trail where the sides of the avalanche trail, where the avalanche come down, are like steel, only it's solid ice. And this was down about 10 feet to the base. We could get down okay, but we had trouble getting out. But I stood on his shoulders, and then I reached down to pull him out. If ice had come down when we were in there, we wouldn't be here today.
There's one other thing that I meant to share with you too, is that Neil was dying in Nepal with hepatitis. We had come home for our son's wedding, and on the way back we went swimming in Thailand in a pool, or how did he get it? We're not sure. I went in the water, so did our daughter. We got back to Tenzin, and we had a near accident even getting to the hospital. Dad was determined he had to drive the car. We had a little Datsun, and on the upper road that was only good for a Jeep. And as you see, he hit a rock, and it turned the car over. But Nepalis were out at night and walking, and people helped. Somehow we got to our house at the hospital, and he was ill. He was so ill, we got him over to the hospital. Sure enough, he had hepatitis, liver failure, and they weren't making any headway, and so they said, Clarice, I think you better get him back to the States. They believed he would die. So, how to do that? We couldn't. We had that little Datsun car. We were amongst the few that had one. And its seat would go down, so we got a mattress in there and we put him in sideways. And a Norwegian nurse man drove. I sat up front. Karen sat in the back with her daddy on the floor. And we got as far as Pulkra. That's up, 3 hours or so to the north. And then we stayed in a place overnight, started out for Kathmandu the next morning, and he was pretty out of it, not very with us. And we got to the old hospital in Kathmandu. At that time, it was housed in an old, what they called the
Rana Palace.
palace. And I'll always remember them carrying him on a stretcher up the old steep wooden stairs. And he got put in a room where another missionary had just died of cancer. And I was told by the old British nurse I couldn't stay with him overnight. So I left Neil. Well, if any of you have had experience with that kind of a illness, you itch, you crawl, you want to scratch. So that's what he did. He took his toenail and he just scratched his legs badly with his toenail. So I said to the nurse, I'm not leaving him. And I stayed the rest of 2 months with Neil beside his bed. And I didn't leave him until the doctor, surgeon, invited us to come down the street from the place, the hospital, and be in their home. And by then, Neil was getting better.
I don't know.
I think so.
I don't like to talk about this story.
Anyway, well, I think you should know.
Yeah.
Neil was dying. But you know, you people at home were praying. And somehow, Neil was healed. And I stayed with him, and I continually put my hands on him, tried to soothe him, comfort him. And I didn't catch cold. I didn't get sick. And I was able to be with him practically night and day. And when the same British nurse heard that the surgeon had invited us to his house, she gave me golly. That is a screaming man, and you shouldn't take Neil there, you know. Well, I can imagine the doctor screaming in surgery when he wanted an instrument and he wasn't getting what he wanted, you know. Well, anyway, he was the kindest guy. He would come home. The month we stayed in his home, he would come in and sit beside Neil and just be gentle and quiet and kind and talk with him. It was just like he was just communing with Neil. And Neil decided that he could get up once and go to the bathroom. Tell him what it was like.
Like 2 football fields. I thought I'd never make it.
It was a long ways
Yeah,
to just
long
go
road.
to the next room to the toilet. But anyway, he did heal, and I was able to bring him with wheelchair aid and things in the airports back to the States. And my doctor, again, down there, that's paid our way a lot, he had arranged for Neil to be checked over by a liver specialist, and Neil's liver did heal. And we were home 3 months maybe, and they didn't know about his brain, if he had lost something up there. But he had it, so we got to come back and work another 2 years or so in Nepal after that near-death experience. So, you know, what sometimes we think is impossible is possible. God does heal.
With God, everything is possible.
Amen.
So with that, thank you for listening to our story.
And thanks for coming and sharing.
Yeah, our pleasure.